For our short story tonight, something you can really sink your teeth into. A vampire in the neighbourhood.
We knew there was something different about Helga the first time we saw her. For one thing, she had that strange name, Helga. Such an old-fashioned name. Helga looked old-fashioned too. She wore the same black skirt to school every day. Old-looking and kind of worn, with no style at all. My friend Carrie and I were sitting in the back of Miss Wheeling's 6th grade class the first day Helga came into school. "Check her out, Maddi," Carrie whispered, motioning with her eyes. I turned to the front of the room and stared at the timid-looking girl talking with Miss Wheeling. With her tight, black ringlets of hair and her pale grey blouse tucked into her black skirt, the girl looked as if she had stepped out of an old movie. "This is Helga Nugenstorm," Miss Wheeling announced. "She is new to our school, and I'm sure you will all make her feel at home." Helga lowered her eyes to the floor. Her skin was so pale, as if it had never seen the sunlight, and she was wearing lipstick. Black lipstick. "She's weird," Carrie whispered. "She's kind of pretty," I replied. "I've never seen anyone who looked like that." Later, Carrie, Yvonne, Joey and I took our usual table in the lunchroom. The four of us are really good friends, and we've been friends for a really long time. We sit together in the lunchroom every day. "Did you see the new girl?" I asked. The four of us were tossing an apple back and forth across the table to each other. "Isn't she weird?" Carrie asked. Yvonne and Joey nodded. "She's so pale, but she wears that yucky black lipstick," Yvonne said. "Maybe she isn't wearing lipstick," Joey joked. "Maybe those are her lips." "Do you know where she lives?" I asked, catching the apple and tossing it at Joey. "She moved into the Dobson house," Yvonne replied. "I was walking by and I saw her moving in." Carrie, Joey and I all gasped in surprise. The apple fell out of Joey's hands and rolled away. The Dobson house stood all by itself, out on the edge of Culliver's Wood. The house had been empty forever. "What a creepy old house," Carrie said. "Did you see Helga's parents?" Yvonne shook her head. "No, it was kind of strange. I saw the moving men carrying in all this old, heavy furniture, and I saw Helga, but I didn't see any grown-ups." "Weird," Carrie muttered again, her favourite word. I started to say something, but I glanced up and saw Helga standing awkwardly in the lunchroom doorway. "I'm going to invite her to sit down with us," I announced, jumping up. "Why, Maddi?" Joey asked. "Maybe we can find out more about her," I replied. I hurried over to Helga. "I'm Maddi Simon," I told her. "I'm in your class. Hey, want to sit with me and my friends?" She stared back at me with her pale grey eyes, the strangest eyes I've ever seen. Ghost eyes, I thought. "No, thank you," she replied. Her voice was soft and whispery. "I never eat lunch." She's a vampire, we decided. The four of us were always searching for vampires. "Helga has to be a vampire," Carrie declared. "She never eats. She looks so old-fashioned. She keeps totally to herself, and she's as pale as death." It was 3 nights later. We were crouched across the road from the old Dobson house, Helga's house. A long, low hedge stretched along the dark street. We hid behind the hedge, huddled together, whispering. We couldn't help ourselves. We had to spy on her. We had to find out the truth. The creepy old house rose up in front of us, pale in the light of the full moon. Behind the house, the trees of Culver's Woods shook and shivered in the wind. "Where is Helga?" Yvonne whispered. "The house is totally dark." "She's in there," I replied, my eyes on the black windows. "She's in there, in the dark." "Weird," Carrie whispered. "I tried to talk to her in school today," Joey reported, "but she walked right past me. She wears those heavy black shoes, but her footsteps didn't make a sound." "Why would anyone move into this horrible old house?" Carrie asked. "It's so far from town. Nothing but woods all around." "For privacy," I replied. "Vampires. They crave privacy." The others giggled. "I thought I saw something move in the window, a grey shadow against the blackness." "Come on, guys," I whispered. "Let's take a closer look." We crept across the road. The silence was eerie. The only sound was the soft, steady whisper of the wind through the trees. The old house seemed to grow darker as we approached it. We pushed through the tall weeds that blanketed the front lawn. Moving silently, we huddled beneath the big front window, pressing ourselves up against the damp, mouldy shingles. "Give me a boost," I whispered to Joey, "so I can look in the window." "Be careful, Maddi," Carrie warned. "Helga might see you." I ignored her warning. I had to take a look. I was just so curious. Joey and Yvonne helped lift me. I grabbed the stone windowsill with both hands and hoisted myself up just high enough to see in. Then I stared in through the dust-smeared glass into a vast, dark living room. A pale square of moonlight poured into the room. I could make out a long couch, wooden and stiff-looking, 2 old-fashioned chairs. I nearly toppled to the ground when I saw Helga. "She's in there," I whispered excitedly to my friends. "I can see her standing in the dark in front of a tall mirror." "Does she have a reflection?" Joey whispered. "Check it out, Maddi. Does she have a reflection?" I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on the darkness. Vampires don't have reflections. I knew. Did Helga have a reflection? "It's too dark to see," I told my friends. Helga turned suddenly toward the window. She seemed to be staring right at me. "Let me down, quick," I demanded. I slid to the ground. "Did she see you?" Carrie asked, her dark eyes wide with excitement. "I don't know," I told her. "I hope not." "Why is she there in the dark?" Joey asked. "Did she have a reflection? Was she walking or floating?" Questions I couldn't answer. "We'll come back tomorrow," I said. The 4 of us met there. Every night, we hid behind the dark, long hedge and spied on Helga's house. We peered into the windows. We crept around back and tried to see in through the kitchen. Some nights, we spotted a dim light in the upstairs window. Most nights, there were no lights on at all. Some nights, we saw Helga inside the house. Always alone, we never saw her parents. We never saw anyone else. My friends and I became obsessed with Helga, with finding out the truth about her. We tried to talk to her in school, but she stared back at us with those wintry grey eyes and never even pretended to be friendly. I invited her to come with us to the basketball game in the gym on Friday night, but she said she didn't like basketball. We tried to get invited to her house. One day, Joey asked if he could come to her house and copy her history notes. Helga said she wouldn't be home that night. "Then how about tomorrow after school?" Joey insisted. "It's not a good idea," Helga replied, mysteriously. She wore the same black skirt every day. She never changed her hairstyle. Her black ringlets hung down that pale, pale face. One day, on an impulse, I grabbed her hand. We were standing side by side in the hall at school, waiting to get into the auditorium. I couldn't help myself. I reached out and squeezed her hand. I had to know what it felt like. I had to find out if it felt alive. I jerked my hand back in shock when I felt how cold Helga's hand was. As cold as a winter day. As cold as death. She is a vampire, I decided. She clasped her pale hands together and gazed at me with those frightening grey eyes. "It's so cold in here," she whispered. "Don't you think so, Maddi?" It was the first time she had ever said my name, and it sent a shiver down my back. That night, my friends and I met in front of Helga's house. Once again, pale moonlight washed over us. It was the only light except for a dim orange glow in an upstairs window. Crouching low behind the hedge, we stared up at the window. The shade was pulled, but we could see Helga's silhouette moving back and forth on the window shade. "She's all alone in there," Carrie whispered. "No parents, no one. She's probably hundreds of years old," I whispered back. "She doesn't look it," Joey joked. We giggled, but our laughter was cut short when the light in the window went off. "She went to bed," Yvonne guessed. "Does she sleep in a coffin?" "She must," I replied, gazing up at the dark window. Something fluttered low over the old house's sloping roof. "A bat?" "All vampires sleep in coffins," Joey murmured. "Coffins filled with the ancient dirt from their graves." "I want to see Helga's coffin," I whispered, standing up. I took a step toward the street, my eyes on the house. "Maddi, come back," Carrie warned. "I have to see Helga's coffin," I told her. "I have to know for sure." We all wanted to know. That's why we spied on Helga every night. I crept silently across the street and into Helga's front yard. Huddled closely together, The other three followed. A twisted, gnarled old tree tilted up toward Helga's bedroom window. I grabbed a low branch and started to pull myself up. The bark felt cold and rough against my hands. The slender branches shook as if trying to toss me off. I clung tightly to the trunk and reached for a higher branch, hoisting myself onto it. I peered through the leaves at the house. Helga's bedroom window was still high above me. I glanced down and saw Carrie, Yvonne and Joey. They had circled the tree and were peering up at me. Even in the darkness, I could see the tense expressions on their face. Up I climbed, ignoring the scratch of the bark, the trembling of the branches. Slowly, steadily, I pulled myself up until I was high enough to see into the bedroom window. Holding tightly onto the trunk, I turned slowly. Lowered my head to see through a tangle of dark leaves, gazed into the window, and saw Helga gazing back at me. Her face gleamed silvery in the wash of moonlight. Her grey eyes glowed evilly as she stared out at me, her ghostly face pressed against the window pane. Too startled to cry out, I started to slip. My hand slid off the trunk. I lurched backwards. No! I thrust out both my arms, grabbed the hard trunk and held on. She saw me. I called down to my friends. Helga saw me. I scrambled down, moving frantically, sliding and scraping down the rough trunk. By the time I reached the ground, my three friends were already running around to the front of the house. Wait up! I called hoarsely. Too late. The front door swung open. Helga moved quickly out the door, down the front stoop, across the weed-choked lawn to block our path. I know you've been spying on me, she cried angrily. You'd better quit it. I'm warning you. I stopped. Carrie, Yvonne and Joey stopped too. We moved together, watching Helga storm towards us. She had her hands balled into tight fists. Her eerie eyes were narrowed at us. Her face twisted into a frightening scowl. My friends and I huddled there in the middle of the dark yard. The trees whispered and shook. The tall weeds swayed all around us. And then the words just burst from my mouth. Helga, are you a vampire? I just blurted out the question without even thinking. Are you a vampire? She moved closer, her grey eyes glowing. Yes, she whispered. Show us your fangs, I demanded. A strange smile spread slowly over Helga's face. No, she replied. You show me your fangs. I hesitated for a second, then I lowered my fangs, and Carrie, Yvonne and Joey lowered their fangs too. Our fangs slid easily out over our lips, down to our chins. We grinned expectantly at Helga. Your turn, I said. But to my surprise, Helga stumbled back and let out a frightened squeal. I was just joking, she cried. I thought you were joking too. No way, I told her. We weren't joking. We're vampires. Me, Carrie, Yvonne, and Joey. All four of us are vampires. We were so disappointed about Helga. We had such high hopes, but we knew what we had to do. We formed a tight circle around her. Then we moved in. The mystery about Helga had been solved. In a few minutes, she would be a vampire too.
Thank you, Traveller, for being here tonight and entertaining me and letting me be a part of your nightmares. I hope you find your way back real soon.